Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Command and Conquer Rivals is the game, and this video is sponsored by EA. And in it, we're going to talk about my top 5 units in the Nod faction. These are my star units, my go-to units anytime I'm trying to find the perfect deck. So that might be because they counter something specific I'm seeing in the meta, or maybe they just give me a go-to reliable strategy, often in the early game, to help me just cement a good lead and win games. So let's go ahead and talk about my 5 best Nod units. These are presented in no particular order, so let's start with Flame Troopers. And I like Flame Troopers for 2 reasons. One, I think they're a great counter to infantry. As you can see, that's what they're strong against. But anytime you upgrade your Flame Troopers, you're also going to be upgrading the ability for the commander Seth, who is my go-to commander for Nod because he's the highest level one I have. So anytime you use these units and upgrade these units and support these units, you're kind of getting 2-for-1 value. You're killing 2 birds with 1 stone because you're upgrading both that ability and some good units on the field. And I think that's really valuable in particular because with the drill pod Seth's ability, you can backdoor a lot and burn down your opponent's base before they even realize what happens, or at the very least make them dedicate some resources to answering the flame troopers, which can also cause them a lot of problems. But even though these only work well against infantry, right? They're not good at all against vehicles. They can't even attack aircraft at all. They're still pretty meaty. I think they have a lot of health. They can be annoying, really can interrupt a lot. And often enemies will often go into things like missile squads or laser squads early. So if you want to have something like an attack bike rush, you can send out some vehicles, force them to counter with infantry, and then you have your flame troopers to follow up and just decimate. Because usually, in my experience, people will build like 3 or 4 missile squads rapidly to try to counter your rush. And then you bring these in to very efficiently deal with those. So it's a really nice 1-2 punch that can help you gain a big early advantage if you're moving into stronger units later. So for me, Flame Troopers are a good core base anytime I'm playing Nod. So up next, let's talk about a unit I just mentioned, the Attack Bikes. Now these are my go-to units for creating really early pressure on my opponent, and sometimes even if it's just faux pressure. I may not be like committing all out to an Attack Bike rush where I hold up 3 or 4 Attack Bikes and send them all at once to kill a Tiberium Harvester. Sometimes I just send 1 or 2 to sort of bait my opponent into fearing that attack bike rush, and then set up counters with things like flame troopers. But the other thing I really like about attack bikes is they offer you good answers to vehicles and aircraft. Of course, that's their strong suits. But beyond that, their speed is really important. Sometimes capturing points with attack bikes is the real advantage. That mobility gives you a lot of flexibility to just go steal a point, go block a point so you can gain an advantage. That's really important too, and they're such a cheap, affordable unit in the late game to do that I think they give you that early game relevancy, but also some late game relevancy, and that's what I like to see. I want all of my units to do 2 good things, so attack bikes work perfectly for that. Moving on, let's talk about the Banshee. Now, this is not a unit I see a lot in other people's decks, but for me, I think the Banshee is a really important counter to things like the Worm for Nod that can't attack aircraft units at all. It's just got a lot of burst damage, so it can melt vehicles really quickly, and it's still capable at fighting other aircraft. So it often fills this sort of gap or niche where it answers things really efficiently, but your opponent might not have a good way to deal with it themselves. Usually people have either really cheap anti-aircraft units or really late game anti-aircraft units, and that can create some awkward moments for them where they're spending their time making weak stuff like missile squads, or they're committing a ton of Tiberium into something late. So for me, I found it as sort of a utility card that I'm not often playing all the time. Like, I'm not always sending this unit into every game, but there are those games from time to time where it just hits that perfect window where your opponent can't do anything with it and it just decimates them. It's also kind of good at backdooring sometimes. It can fly over everything, just head to their base. If you just need a couple hits because you've been diving with like flame troopers, for instance, the Banshee can get a few blasts off before they quickly kill it. You can just start chaining those. Sometimes that can be an efficient strategy as well. So for me, I don't know if this is a popular unit among most people, but for some reason or another, I just seem to make it work a lot. And maybe it's flying under the radar a little bit, maybe flying over other people's units a little bit. But for me, it fills that gap nicely. So I tend to slot it into different decks just because it kind of works. Up next, let's talk about the Confessor. And you might think, well, Reed, you like flame troopers, confessors are also really good against infantry. Why do you have 2 infantry units that are good against infantry? Well, part of the reason is I like this bundle of infantry units because the Confessor has an extra ability, which you can see empowers other adjacent infantry units with extra attack speed. So if you have a few different strong infantry units and they're all working together, things can really snowball. And a 30% boost is a really, really big deal. That's a giant difference. So for me, these offer that really strong late game unit with a ton of health. They are really difficult to kill. They're also good against aircraft. I think that's less important over the fact, though, that they just create all these opportunities with a strong infantry push. When you're seeing things like zone troopers or cyborgs pretty often, at least I have been, these are a great answer to those. Those units are both good against vehicles and aircraft, but not good against fellow infantry. So you got that late game strength unit that can still go toe to toe with other late game stuff while also empowering your infantry. So again, it's sort of serving that dual purpose, which to me goes a long way. And that's why I like to bundle this card into my decks often. And then finally, one last thing, we're going to move backwards here a little bit and we're going to head over to the Laser Squad. And I think I'm saving this one for last just because it's one of the most go-to units in the game. Like, everybody has missile squads and laser squads, and there's a reason for that. They're just a really important early counter to a lot of prominent strategies. You need that cheap, flexible unit that can answer really fast vehicles and aircraft, and that's exactly what the laser squad does. So it is absolutely a powerhouse. Almost every lineup I've seen includes something like this, unless it's some sort of dedicated all-in strategy. So you have to mention this card. It's just too important. And its brother on GDI, the Missile Squad 2. They're both fundamental to the game and how the game operates. So for me, it's an obvious choice. It has to be on a top 5 list. There are some other cards I love running because they're strong and they're cool and they do amazing things. But this is like the workhorse of the game. You have to have the Laser Squad if you want to succeed, particularly early on in Command & Conquer Rivals if you're climbing a lot. So for me, this card is just the star. You have to include it. It is an obvious inclusion for any top 5 list. The Laser Squad is just good. All that said, those are my top 5 units. Now, if you're still not familiar with Command & Conquer Rivals, there's a few things I want to say. First off, it's made by EA's Redwood Studios, who I think is doing a fantastic job supporting the game, sending out updates, providing new units, balancing passes, all the stuff you hope and expect to see in a game like this. So that's great. Beyond that, it is, of course, a real-time strategy game, adapted for mobile, certainly, but still very much gives you control and micro sorts of play that you might be used to if you're a long-term real-time strategy game player. If you're interested in checking it out, there is a link in the description below for you to download the game now. It's totally free, so spend 5 minutes, see what you think. If you play an actual match, I think you'll really, really enjoy it. It has an incredibly fun gameplay loop, or I wouldn't be talking about it. But all that said, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.